Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote Notes from Underground in 1864, a work widely considered one of the first existentialist texts, emphasizing the paramount importance of freedom, responsibility, and individuality. It stands as an extraordinary piece of literature, simultaneously a biting social critique, a satire of the Russian nihilist movement, and a novel offering profound psychological insights into human nature. It is no wonder that Nietzsche declared, Dostoevsky, the only psychologist from whom I've anything to learn. He ranks amongst the most beautiful strokes of fortune in my life. Dostoevsky's most sustained and spirited attack on the Russian nihilist movement emerges through one of his darkest and least sympathetic characters, the nameless narrator known only as the Underground Man. Through this protagonist, Dostoevsky reveals the hopeless dilemmas that result from nihilist philosophy. Notes from Underground attempts to warn readers against several dangerous ideas, gaining traction in the 1860 seconds: moral and political nihilism, rational egoism, determinism, utilitarianism, utopianism, atheism, and the emerging ideology of communism. Many of these themes permeate the novel. However, to fully appreciate Dostoevsky's warning, we must first examine the historical context in which he wrote. Historical context: the rise of nihilism. In 1862, Ivan Turgenev published Fathers and Sons, one of the most acclaimed Russian novels of the century, introducing readers to a strange new philosophy called nihilism that captivated Russian youth. Previously synonymous with skepticism, nihilism transformed into a moral and political force. A nihilist is a man who does not bow down before any authority, who does not accept any principle on faith, whatever reverence that principle may be enshrined in. These nihilist characters define themselves as those who deny everything, representing the negation of all pre-existing ideals. Rational egoism emerged as the dominant social philosophy of the Russian nihilist movement, proposing that true rationality means maximizing one's own self-interest. This philosophy shares similarities with utilitarianism, which seeks to maximize utility, well-being, or happiness for all individuals. Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism, even developed a mathematical formula called the hedonic calculus to measure pleasure and pain resulting from any action, believing human behavior could be predicted through pure rationality. Dostoevsky perceived the rise of rational egoism as a genuine danger. By glorifying the self, it could corrupt impressionable young people, steering them away from sound values toward a truly immoral and destructive egoism. This mindset is perfectly captured in the line, "I say let the world go to hell, but I should always have my tea." Dostoevsky's critique of Western individualism. After traveling through Europe, Dostoevsky observed what he saw as the dominant principle of Western culture. A principle of individuality, a principle of isolation, intense self-preservation, of personal egoism, self-definition in terms of one's own I, in placing this I in opposition to all nature and all other people as an autonomous, independent principle, completely equal and equally valuable to everything that exists outside it. In stark contrast, Dostoevsky called for a return to the soil, emphasizing the value of family, religion, personal responsibility, and brotherly love, a philosophy in which each individual feels part of the whole and stands ready to sacrifice for others. He championed this conscious self-sacrifice, which cannot spring from calculations of self-interest. The underground man exists under the influence of egoistic individualism, considering himself an educated man, a modern intellectual who has lost all capacity for selfless moral feeling. As Dostoevsky writes in a footnote to the novel, both the author of the notes and the notes themselves are, of course, fictitious. Nevertheless, such persons as the author of such memoirs not only may, but must, exist in our society, if we take into consideration the circumstances which led to the formation of our society. A. Response to Chernyshevsky's Utopianism. Notes from Underground was written as a direct response to Nikolai Chernyshevsky, the spokesman of Russian radicals, who wrote What is to be Done in 1863. In his novel, Chernyshevsky echoed Rousseau's idea that despite human flaws, man is innately good and amenable to reason, corrupted only by society's influence. He believed that once enlightened to his true interests, man could use reason and science to construct a perfect society. In this vision, a society built on rational calculations of self-interest would eliminate the very possibility of evil. Thus, rational egoism became the foundation for developing a utopian society. Their dream was to build a well-ordered society for predictably acting human beings. This utopia found its symbol in the Crystal Palace, representing humanity's quintessential achievement where all problems would be solved. Chernyshevsky wrote that following the radical socialist path would transform society into a crystal palace. He also proposed absolute determinism, the absence of free will, which Dostoevsky brilliantly critiques through his Underground Man. In Chernyshevsky's novel, while extolling rational egoism, one character asks rhetorically, "Do you hear that in your underground hole?" 1 year later, Dostoevsky published Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky's vision and prophetic warning. Dostoevsky believed man was innately irrational, capricious, and destructive, that not reason but only faith in Christ could help him master the chaos of his impulses. With atheism on the rise, Dostoevsky saw disaster looming for society and emphasized the necessity of belief in Christ. After his death, his warnings became reality as he foresaw the rise of the totalitarian state, a theme he also explored in his novel Demons, an allegory of the catastrophic consequences of political and moral nihilism. Marx's ideology gave way to communism, implemented by Lenin and Stalin, convincing people that a perfect society without God was possible, a golden age with abundant resources equally distributed, eliminating suffering forever. These totalitarian states justified murder in the name of ideology, leading to the bloodshed of the 20th century. Unfortunately, we have not learned from these mistakes. As Hegel observed, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. Today, the West remains plagued by mass delusions, where crimes against humanity hide beneath the attractive cloak of progress, with renewed attempts to create utopia. The Underground Man portrait of an anti-hero. The Underground Man is the quintessential anti-hero, a bitter, lonely, self-hating 40-year-old retired civil servant living underground. More precisely, as the Russian text indicates, he inhabits a sort of crawl space, too small for humans, where bugs and rodents roam. This explains why he calls himself a mouse. Here he has remained for years, listening to people through a crack beneath the floor, writing his notes from underground. However, the underground functions best as a metaphor for his profound alienation from society. He lives locked away, and these are his confessions. I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. No, I refuse to consult a doctor from spite. That you probably will not understand. My liver is bad, well, let it get worse. We encounter the strange behavior and psychological distress of the underground man immediately. He calls himself sick, then spiteful, then unattractive, finally mentioning his liver problem. He constantly revises himself to please his imaginary audience, yet cannot characterize himself properly. Clearly, he does not act to promote his own best interests, as rational egoism dictates. He writes, "In reality, I never could become spiteful. I was conscious every moment in myself of many, very many elements, absolutely opposite to that. I knew that they had been swarming in me all my life, and craving some outlet from me, but I would not let them, purposely would not let them come out. They tormented me till I was ashamed. They drove me to convulsions and sickened me. At last, how they sickened me." The underground man appears as nothing more than a chaos of conflicting emotional impulses, His conflict may be defined as a search for his own character, a quest to find himself, for he does not know who he is. This plague torments him, yet he knows this is his normal condition and that there is no escape. Consequently, he attempts to detach from reality into the world of literature, spending most of his time reading and feeling utterly disappointed when confronting the real world. As he admits, "I could not speak except as though I was reading from a book." At other times, he offers remarkably lucid insights into the human psyche. Every man has reminiscences which he would not tell to everyone but only to his friends. He has other matters in his mind which he would not reveal even to his friends, but only to himself, and that in secret. But there are other things which a man is afraid to tell even to himself, and every decent man has a number of such things stored away in his mind. The more decent he is, the greater the number of such things in his mind. Two types of men: action versus consciousness. Dostoevsky distinguishes between two types of men, the man of action and the man of acute consciousness. The underground man envies the man of action intensely, he who lives life without excessive rumination. This man possesses a lower intellectual capacity that frees him from the questions and torments of consciousness, while the underground man remains paralyzed by his thoughts. Dostoevsky provides an analogy with the stone wall, representing scientific determinism. One must accept these laws as truth without question. 2 times 2 makes 4, and anyone who says otherwise is foolish. This represents a barrier to free will. When seeking revenge, the man of action charges straight toward his goal like an infuriated bull with lowered horns, seeking justice. But when he encounters the stone wall, he stands genuinely surprised and speechless. The wall is not an evasion, but simply what renders his activity impossible. The underground man, conversely, devises all sorts of tricks. Instead of admitting defeat and turning away, he smashes his head against the wall, while knowing the futility of his actions. Of course, I cannot break through the wall by battering my head against it if I really have not the strength to knock it down. But I am not going to be reconciled to it simply because it is a stone wall and I have not the strength, as though such a wall really were a consolation. Every course of action seems insufficient, leaving him paralyzed, or as Dostoevsky describes it, trapped in a state of inertia, able only to think but unable to act. He suffers the greatest ailment of all, consciousness. To think too much is a disease. This perfectly describes the underground man's condition, stuck in his own reflective hyperconsciousness, accumulating greater spite than the man of action ever could. The result: the intellectual cannot do anything and thus remains characterless. He writes, "I did not know how to become anything, neither spiteful nor kind, neither a rascal nor an honest man, neither a hero nor an insect. Now I am living out my life in my corner, taunting myself with the spiteful and useless consolation that an intelligent man cannot become anything seriously, and it is only the fool who becomes anything. The paradox of superior intelligence." He remains aware of his flaws, while the man of action contentedly believes in his own greatness despite his foolishness. The underground man finds solace in being smarter than everyone he meets, yet socially they all stand well above him. His vanity convinces him of his intellectual superiority, and he despises everybody. But when he realizes he cannot rest without their recognition of his superiority, he hates others for their indifference and falls into self-loathing at his own humiliating dependence. The underground man considers the man of action the real normal man, while viewing himself as a product born from a test tube. He calls himself a mouse, though nobody tells him, so it is as if he has constructed a hell from his own internal ruminations. The luckless mouse succeeds in creating around it so many other nastinesses, in the form of doubts, emotions, and of the contempt spat upon it by the direct men of action. Of course, the only thing left for it is to dismiss all that with a wave of its paw, and, with a smile of assumed contempt in which it does not even itself believe, creep ignominiously into its mousehole. There, in its nasty, stinking, underground home, our insulted, crushed, and ridiculed mouse promptly becomes absorbed in cold, malignant, and above all, everlasting spite. For 40 years together, it will remember its injury down to the smallest, most ignominious details, and every time will add, of itself, details still more ignominious, spitefully teasing and tormenting itself with its own imagination. The underground man essentially buries himself alive with spite, but there is a twist. He reveals that in this state of despair, dissatisfaction, and hopelessness, he finds his enjoyment. He notes that people most likely will not understand any of it. He believes man is cursed with consciousness, but simultaneously that consciousness enables free will and individuality. With consciousness, man must suffer. Yet without consciousness, man can never be free. A clear critique of determinism. Whatever happened, happened in accordance with the normal and fundamental laws of intensified consciousness, and by a sort of inertia which is a direct consequence of those laws. And therefore, you could not only not change yourself, but you simply couldn't make any attempt to. The pleasure in suffering. The underground man discovers an irrational pleasure in suffering, even in his painful toothache, which makes him moan maliciously to make others suffer, giving him pleasure. He is not only a sadist, but also confesses his masochism. I felt a sort of secret, abnormal, contemptible delight when, on coming home on one of the foulest nights in Petersburg, I used to realize intensely that again I had been guilty of some dastardly action that day, and inwardly, secretly, I used to go on nagging myself, worrying myself, accusing myself, till at last the bitterness I felt turned into a sort of shameful, damnable sweetness, and finally into real, positive delight. Yes, into delight. The feeling of delight was there just because I was so intensely aware of my own degradation. The essence of his activity springs simply from being plagued with boredom. With heightened consciousness, he cannot stop thinking. I invented adventures for myself and made up a life, so as at least to live in some way. How many times it has happened to me, well, for instance, to take offense simply on purpose, for nothing. And one knows oneself, of course, that one is offended at nothing, that one is putting it on, but yet one brings oneself at last to the point of being really offended. The rebellion against determinism. While the underground man remains committed to the principles of rational egoism, he simultaneously opposes it throughout the entire novel. His conflict arises from the clash between human nature and the laws of nature. While his reason assures him that nothing can really change for the better, he refuses to surrender his consciousness to determinism. He wants to preserve his individuality and rebel against the comfortable predictability of life. What is to be done with the millions of facts that bear witness that men, consciously, that is fully understanding their real interests, have left them in the background and have rushed headlong on another path to meet peril and danger? And what if it so happens that a man's advantage sometimes not only may, but even must, consist in his desiring, in certain cases, what is harmful to himself and not advantageous? The underground man argues that man is by no means a rational animal, and that he will always rebel against the idea of utopia, acting against his self-interest, simply to validate his existence and confirm his individuality. Man is monstrously ungrateful. In fact, he writes that the best definition of man is the ungrateful biped. But that is not his worst defect. His worst defect is his constant deviation from moral order. One need only glance at the history of mankind to observe this. He writes, "One may say anything about the history of the world, anything that might enter the most disordered imagination. The only thing one can't say is that it's rational. The most advantageous advantage." The underground man asserts that man would sacrifice all his advantages just to be independent and choose for himself, and only the devil knows what he will choose. Man would even desire what is injurious, what is stupid, very stupid, simply to have the right to desire for himself. This caprice of ours may in reality be more advantageous than anything else on earth. He calls it our most advantageous advantage, which does not fit in any system, something for which one even sacrifices happiness, health, prosperity, and security simply to preserve what is most precious and most important, our personality, our individuality. He writes, apropos of nothing, in the midst of general prosperity, a gentleman with an ignoble, or rather with a reactionary and ironical countenance, were to arise and, putting his arms akimbo, say to us all, I say, gentlemen, hadn't we better kick over the whole show and scatter rationalism to the winds, simply to send these logarithms to the devil, and to enable us to live once more at our own sweet foolish will? The underground man does not critique reason itself, but rather a completely one-sided rationalistic view of the world that fails to satisfy human impulses and desires a realm much wider than reason and much closer to the human condition. A person always and everywhere prefers to act as they feel like acting, not as their reason and interest dictate. Shower upon man every earthly blessing, drown him in a sea of happiness, so that nothing but bubbles of bliss can be seen on the surface. Give him economic prosperity, such that he should have nothing else to do but sleep, eat cakes, and busy himself with the continuation of his species. And even out of sheer ingratitude, sheer spite, man would play you some nasty trick, simply in order to prove to himself, as though that was so necessary, that men still are men, and not the keys of a piano, which the laws of nature threaten to control so completely that soon one will be able to desire nothing but by the calendar. Man is not a piano key. Dostoevsky attacks the idea that greater rationality leads to greater human progress and happiness. This represents an attempt to reduce life to a mathematical formula, aligning man with society's best interests. Man is not a piano key. He cannot simply discover the laws of nature and find all the answers to his problems, creating a world where everything is so clearly calculated and explained that choices cease to exist. Life would become extraordinarily dull, and man will act against reason to prove his free will, insisting that 2 times 2 equals 5. And if he does not find the means, he will contrive destruction, chaos, and sufferings of all sorts. If one argues that this too can be calculated and tabulated so that the mere possibility of predicting it would prevent it and reason would reassert itself, then man would purposely go mad to be rid of reason and gain his point. Dostoevsky observed this madness firsthand among fellow prisoners in the Siberian labor camp, describing a prisoner's sudden violent outburst as simply the poignant hysterical craving for self-expression, the unconscious yearning for himself, the desire to assert himself, to assert his crushed person, a desire which suddenly takes possession of him and reaches the pitch of fury, of spite, of mental aberration, of fits and nervous convulsions. The unpredictability of human nature. The rational egoists must admit that human action is radically unpredictable and their program is doomed to failure. Man likes to make roads and to create, that is a fact beyond dispute. But why has he such a passionate love for destruction and chaos also? May it not be that he loves chaos and destruction because he is instinctively afraid of attaining his object and completing the edifice he is constructing? Who knows? Perhaps he only loves that edifice from a distance, and is by no means in love with it at close quarters. Perhaps he only loves building it and does not want to live in it. In fact, man is a comical creature. There seems to be a kind of jest in it all. This edifice refers to the Crystal Palace, the literal end of history, when all further striving, struggle, and inner conflict will have ceased. He writes, I rejected the Crystal Palace myself for the sole reason that one would not be allowed to stick out one's tongue at it. Dostoevsky asserts that man will never renounce suffering, destruction, and chaos, and that it is sometimes very pleasant to smash things. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. That is a fact. We desire happiness but possess a special talent for making ourselves miserable. Man resembles a chess player who loves the process of the game but not its conclusion. Attempting to abolish suffering and replace it with everlasting happiness only plunges us deeper into misery. Man needs suffering as much as he needs happiness. Which is better, cheap happiness or sublime suffering? Well, come on, which is better?